Okay, welcome back to another episode of Mr. Rodder's Neighborhood. And today we're going to do things a little bit different than we've done in the past. Normally I dig into a bunch of stuff and show you things that may or may not work, or things that I do, or just put things together and create some neat, interesting Buick projects. But today is a little bit different because I'm a little miffed, to be honest with you. I was informed the other day of an article that was recently printed in the most current Hot Rod magazine, which is probably like June or July of 2022. And it was an article that compared all of the virtually the big block versus small block categories of all the major manufacturers through the history of the automotive industry in the United States. And it's not so much just the United States, it's actually worldwide when you start talking about things like Cleveland Fords and Windsor Fords and Chevrolet small block and all this and that. But the article was recently printed and it was written by a guy named Johnny Hunkins. But the thing is that Johnny Hunkins pretty much in the article went on to point out a lot of things about the Buick small block that were very inaccurate and in my opinion were incorrect. Okay, so let me see here. I'm holding this thing all wrong and it's shaking like crazy. So without further ado, I guess I'll get into where I ended up getting miffed about a lot of this stuff. Okay, so I'll read you the article, just a small blurb write-up on the Buick small block. But he goes on to say, the small block 350 cubic inch Buick V8, the cost versus power face-off makes a more compelling argument with less popular, less well-supported manufacturers. If you're a Buick fan, for instance, you'll quickly discover that it's almost impossible to field a competitive 350 small block Buick due to the dearth of power parts for the short-lived engine family. The 350 Buick debuted in 1968 and shared more with the 231 cubic inch V6 than either the earlier nailhead big block or the 400 cubic inch big block released in 1967. It has both its aluminum timing cover and bore diameter in common with the 231 cubic inch V6. An undersquare design, small bore, long stroke, and a small intake valve kept power in check while making the small block Buick wide as a big block Chevy. If you're looking for a small underdog Buick to beat Chevys with, you'd do better to build a turbocharged and intercooled 231 cubic inch V6 LC2 as found in the 86 to 87 Buick Grand National. All right, so pretty much to sum that up, he's just telling you not to build a Buick small block because they're turds and there's no parts available for them. All right, well, you know me, I like small block stuff. The small block Buick stuff, for instance, is kind of my gambit. I've always loved this engine because it was underdog, it was overrated or underrated, and unfortunately this guy did not hit the nail on the head in this small snippet of his article. This is literally just one paragraph talking about the 350 Buick. But to set the record straight, in a world today dominated by corporate salesmanship, the small block Buick was pretty much one of the engines that was kicked to the curb because there was little parts development for it. There was not many people building them because they were complicated compared to a Chevrolet small block or something that you could go get that had 20 different sets of heads available. Now, heads didn't become a big thing until about the 1990s, right? There wasn't a lot of cylinder heads available for just about anything until the 1990s, as well as aftermarket parts and support. Most engines at that point were people that thought outside the box and used ingenuity and their technical prowess to build things that were of a performance nature, right? That's what it was called hot rodding. The thing that really irks me is that this is Hot Rod magazine saying this same thing. And Hot Rod Magazine was derived from essentially a group of like-minded individuals that like performance, and they tried to better those, not just Buicks, but all engines in general, by using their technical abilities to make them better, right? And it wasn't until the aftermarket got involved that you see the freight train run away with the small block Chevrolet and the small block Ford and Cleveland stuff. But in the early years, there was writers like Ack Miller and Racer Brown that actually had the mind to think around the problems that inhibited these engines. He actually states in this article, word for word, that essentially the 350 Buick debuted in 1968 and shared more with the 231 cubic inch V6 than the earlier nailhead and big block. So in reality, the engine family debuted in 1961. In 1961, it came out as the 215 all aluminum V8 Buick. It was also shared with the Oldsmobile in the F85, and there is so many things similar between all of the engines that things are very much interchangeable. Now, the problem I have with it is 1961, when the engine debuted, it was a technological marvel. It was so far advanced and so far ahead of everything else that let me put this in perspective for you. It almost made 1 horsepower per cubic inch. Okay, and that being 215 cubic inch isn't saying a lot. You might end up with a 205 cubic inch engine or a 205 horsepower out of a 215 cubic inch engine. But the only other thing that was making that kind of power at that time was like a 409 Chevrolet, right? 425 horse. But it took exotic stuff at that time to make things go above 1 horsepower per cubic inch. Solid lifter cams, mechanical fuel injection. That's where things started compounding for your big blocks. This is in a time when big blocks and big cubic inches supreme, and 215 cubic inches was meant for, every day going to the grocery store and picking up groceries and coming home, right? It wasn't made for drag racing or road racing. It essentially was made for just economy, all right? But you had 205 horsepower out of a 215 cubic inch engine, all right? That's substantial. Now, if you look at the Oldsmobile version, they actually put a turbo on that same engine, and it was 215 horsepower, right? It was only like 10 more horsepower than the regular 215 that was available with just a carburetor. But that's 1 horsepower per cube. And that was, at its time, the engine only weighed 320 pounds. It's a lightweight casting that was cast out of aluminum. In 1962, Mickey Thompson took that same engine, he bored it, stroked it, and put it in an Indy car, all right? There's only 3 other engines that were ever produced by the manufacturer that ran Indy car, besides the 215 Buick. You had the small block Chevrolet, you had the small block Ford, and then later on, the 231 cubic inch V6 Buick, right? Well, of course, this engine was designed around 215 cubic inches, which had a bore of 3.5 inches. The bore centers on it are 4.24 inch bore center. When he says that the valves are small and the bore is small, well, kind of obvious, right? When you got a small bore, you can't have big valves in an engine. You just can't do it. You can't physically fit them in the engine without shrouding the valve so bad that it actually inhibits performance. With the bore center that small, no matter what, the engine was always going to have a small bore in comparison to everything else. But the bore to stroke ratio of, let's say, a 215 or a 300 cubic inch Buick is actually very similar to what they used in Pro Stock up to about 10 years ago, I guess. The valve angle on a Buick is factory 15 degrees. A Chevrolet small block is 23 degrees. And if you have an all-out racing performance small block Chevrolet, they lay the valves back to 19 or 17 degrees. But the reason for that is the flow greatly increases. Okay, you get more performance out of the cylinder head. Well, the Buick is already 15 degrees from the factory. All right, and that, in my opinion, mixed with the small bore, is what makes the magic happen with a turbocharger. Right, that's why the Grand National performed the way it did. EFI and a turbo overcame the small bore and the small valves by forcing air in and out of the engine. But the flow characteristics of the head were still really good, just because the valves are so far laid back. The other thing is, it's got a pent roof design. It's kind of like a poly Mopar, like a 318 poly, okay, or kind of like a let's say a semi-hemispherical big block Chevrolet, or it's a pent roof design, right? So the head design is what made this thing amazing. But that family didn't start in 1968 and end in 81. That family of engine started way back in 1961, and originally was the 215 V8 as well as the 225 V6 Buick. It also had a smaller version that was 178 cubic inches. But all of those parts are virtually interchangeable amongst the entire family, right? Meaning that you can use push rods, you can use rock arms, you can use the timing covers, the oil pumps are the same. Of course, you can't change the oil pan between the V8 and the V6, but there are many parts that are interchangeable. All of them having the same bore center means that essentially the cylinder heads are mixing and matchable capable. And this is the thing that I hate about the corporate machine that is today's Hot Rod magazine. No one thinks outside the box of being able to go to buying something and putting it together when you could mix and match the way hot rodders used to do with factory parts. Okay, the reason why I'm so miffed about this is really he's telling you to go buy a Buick Grand National versus trying to hot rod a 350 Buick. Okay, and the Buick Grand National, let's just even say the engine parts for the Buick Grand National. One, they're few and far between. Okay, they made probably 400 350 Buicks for every one turbocharged Grand National. I don't know what the number really is. It's got to be something staggering, because a turbocharged Grand National was only available from 85 to 87 that had EFI, right? And the EFI, the intercooling and the turbochargers is kind of what made that thing really come into its own. And that was only available 86 and 87. But the 350 Buick was available from 68 to 81. But if you take it an engine family as a whole, it starts in 61 and actually ends with the last 3800 Series 3 V6 Buick, which was 2008. Okay, so that family covers a broad gambit. Now, the 300 cubic inch Buick, you could get it in 1964 and 65 in what Buick called the Wildcat 355. It was rated on torque, not horsepower, torque. The funny thing is, it made 290 horsepower and 355 foot-pounds of torque. Buick rated all their engines on torque in the early 60s. That's still that's 10 horsepower shy of being 1 horsepower per cubic inch. It had a hydraulic flat tappet cam that was meant specifically for torque and fuel economy. With just a slight cam change, that engine would easily make over 300 horsepower, right? And that's 300 cubic inches. In my personal opinion, the entire machine has got this all wrong. And that's because no one built anything to support this, including Buick. In 1964 and 65, that 355 Wildcat 300 Buick engine only was available with the 4-barrel 64 and 65. 66 and 7, it only came with a 2-barrel smog cam and 9-to-1 compression. If the program had continued, there'd be much more parts available. Even GM didn't make intake manifolds for a 4-barrel 300 past 1965. The reason why was everyone was focused on big cubic inch, big horsepower, right? But if you go back and you Google 1964 Buick Special Wildcat 355, you're going to find a ton of pictures of these cars in the winter circles at local drag strips. And that's because back then, a lot of the classes were based on weight to cubic inch, right? Or stock horsepower rating. Those cars, the engine itself weighs 175 pounds less than a small block Chevrolet. Okay, so 175 pounds in a drag racing purpose directly off the nose of a car makes a huge difference when you're talking acceleration contest. Okay, you can actually, you lose 175 pounds, but it's directly off the nose. So even if the motor was legitimately down on cubic inch or power, 175 pounds is a lot to make up directly off the nose. So if you had the 64 version that came with aluminum heads and aluminum intake manifold, that number is actually closer to 200 pounds directly off the nose. But I feel that he got this all wrong, and if he had actually done his homework and found out that the engine family goes beyond 1968 to 81, it was actually the second longest production run family that there really was. Just my personal opinion. I don't know how I feel about it. You know, I'm biased anyway towards Buicks, but I think these guys, they need to do a little bit more homework, especially when it comes to bad-mouthing the small block Buick family. If you really want some details, why don't you take a few minutes and look up the Repco V8. It's used in Formula One, based on a 215 Buick. That's all I got for today. I'll see you later. Oh, hey, and don't forget, we're having an event called the No Name Nationals, Sykeston, Missouri, September 30th, October 1st. It's at Jeffers Motorsports Park. You can register, you can pre-register on nonamenationals.com. You can even buy pre-registered spectator tickets on there. You'll save yourself $5 on the spectator ticket. At the gate, it's going to be $20. Pre-registered is $15 a day. So make sure you head on over to nonamenationals.com and get yourself enrolled.